The banquet hall of Blackthorn Pack smelled of roasted venison, spiced wine, and cruelty. Alara Vance stood pressed against the servant's alcove, a silver tray trembling in her hands, willing herself invisible. She had almost succeeded. Almost made it through the Alpha King's welcoming feast, without being noticed. Then Mira's voice sliced across the hall, like a blade dipped in honey. "Oh, wait. I have the perfect idea." 300 heads turned. Alara's stomach dropped before she even understood why. Mira Blackthorn, the Alpha's daughter and the Pack's golden beta, rose from the high table with a wine glass balanced between two fingers. Her smile was the kind that had ruined Alara's life a dozen times already. Tonight, it promised worse. "Father," Mira said sweetly, "the Alpha King has traveled so far. Shouldn't we honor him with the Luna hymn? It's tradition, isn't it?" When royalty visits, a murmur of approval rippled through the nobles. The Luna hymn, the sacred song only unmated females of pure voice were meant to sing a prayer to the moon for the blessing of a true mate. It was an honor, a privilege, something the Pack's most beautiful daughters fought over. "Excellent idea," Alpha Blackthorn rumbled. "Mira, of course, you'll—" "Oh, no." Mira's eyes found Alara across the hall and they gleamed. "I think Alara should sing it." The silence that followed was so complete, Alara could hear her own heartbeat. Then the laughter began. It started at Mira's table a snort, a giggle, and spread like fire through dry grass. The warriors howled. The noble women tittered behind jeweled fingers. Even the kitchen staff she worked beside every day dropped their gazes and smiled into their aprons, unwilling to defend her. Because everyone knew Alara Vance was the rejected Omega, the scentless disgrace. The girl whose own mate had publicly cast her aside at 16, claiming her wolf was broken and her blood thin as water. The girl who had been demoted from Alpha Blackthorn's distant cousin to his scullery maid in a single night 3 years ago, when her parents died in the border raids and no one remembered she'd once worn silk. The girl who would desecrate the Luna hymn simply by opening her mouth. "Come now, Alara," Mira called, her voice syrup thick with mock encouragement. "Don't be shy. The Alpha King is waiting." Alara's fingers tightened on the tray until her knuckles went white. She did not look toward the high dais. She did not dare. She had not looked at him once. Since he'd arrived an hour ago, King Ronan Voltaire, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, whose name made Packs across 3 kingdoms drop to one knee. She had only felt him. His presence pressed against the air of the hall like the moment before a thunderstorm. Heavy, electric, impossible to ignore. Every wolf in the room had been keeping their eyes low all evening, subdued by the oppressive weight of his alpha aura. And now, Mira wanted her to sing in front of him. Ilara's voice cracked. "I am not worthy of the hymn, Lady Mira. Please." "Nonsense." Mira gestured grandly. "The moon hears all voices equally. Isn't that what the priestesses say?" She tilted her head, her smile sharpening. "Unless you're afraid, little Omega." Another wave of laughter. Ilara's throat closed. She thought of simply dropping the tray and running. She thought of throwing the wine into Mira's perfect face. She thought of all the small, stupid acts of defiance she had dreamed about in 3 years of scrubbing floors and swallowing insults, and how none of them would save her. If she refused, she would be whipped for disrespect before the court. If she sang, she would be mocked until the last star died. Her gaze flickered up, just once, toward the high dais and froze. The Alpha King was watching her, not glancing, not idly observing, watching, the way a wolf watches something that has just stepped into a clearing. His face was carved from stone, cold and unreadable, framed by dark hair that fell to his shoulders. He wore black, no crown, no ornaments, nothing but a simple silver clasp at his throat shaped like a crescent moon. His eyes were the color of winter iron, and they had not left her since Mira spoke her name. His expression did not change, but something in the air did. The oppressive aura that had been pressing on the hall all evening shifted, focused, narrowed, until Alara felt it wrap around her like a hand closing gently beneath her chin, lifting her gaze, not forcing, steadying. "Sing," something inside her whispered, in a voice that was not her own. Her breath caught, She set the tray down on the nearest table. Her hands had stopped shaking. "As my lady commands," she said quietly, and she walked into the center of the hall. Her bare feet made no sound on the flagstones. Her servant's dress, rough gray wool stained at the hem with ash, pooled around her ankles as she stopped beneath the great chandelier. Candlelight caught in her unbound hair the color of dark honey, and for a moment, one of the older noblewomen whispered something to her husband, frowning, as if seeing Alara for the first time. Alara closed her eyes. She had not sung the Luna hymn in 3 years. Her mother had taught it to her when she was 7 years old, sitting on the edge of a stone, well at the edge of the forest. The two of them alone beneath a harvest moon. "Every woman of our blood sings this," her mother had said, brushing her hair. "It is older than the pack, older than the kingdom, older than the stone beneath our feet. When you sing it, little wolf, sing it for yourself first. The moon listens to the heart, not the throat." Alara had forgotten so much of her mother's face, but she remembered the song. She opened her mouth, and the hall stopped breathing. The first note was low, barely a whisper, a thread of sound that seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than from her small body. It was not the trained soprano of the noble daughters who usually sang this hymn at festivals. It was something older, rougher, a voice that had wept into pillows and swallowed screams and still, somehow, remembered how to reach for the moon. The second note climbed higher, and the candles on the long tables flickered as one. Mira's smile began to slip. By the third measure, a kitchen boy near the back had dropped a tray without noticing, too stunned to move. By the fifth, one of the elder warriors, a grizzled veteran who had not wept in 40 years, was pressing the back of his hand against his mouth. By the time Alara reached the first high, aching phrase of the refrain, every wolf in the hall had turned their head toward her as if drawn by an invisible string. Because the Luna hymn, when sung properly, was supposed to sound beautiful. When Alara sang it, it sounded true. It sounded like loneliness, like hunger, like a woman on her knees in a winter field begging the sky for any kindness at all. It sounded like every wolf in the room who had ever lain awake wondering if their mate would ever come. And woven through all of that impossibly was joy. A fragile, burning, stubborn joy, like a single candle held steady in a storm. On the high dais, the Alpha King had not moved. He had not moved in a very long time. His hand rested on the arm of his chair, and his knuckles were white. His jaw was locked. His eyes, those winter iron eyes, had gone wide, and something behind them looked like a man who had just heard a voice he had been searching the world for since before he was old enough to know what searching meant. Beside him, his second in command, a silver-haired warrior named Cassian, was staring at him in open alarm. Because Cassian had served the Alpha King for 11 years, and in 11 years he had never, not once, seen King Ronan Valter look afraid. Alara's voice lifted into the final verse. The hymn spoke of the moon finding her lost children, of silver light on dark water, of the bond between mates that no distance could break and no death could silence. Alara sang the words her mother had taught her, and as she sang them, tears slipped down her cheeks without her permission, because for 3 years she had believed she was unlovable, unchosen, broken, and for these 3 minutes the moon was listening, and the moon did not agree. She held the final note until her lungs emptied, then silence. A silence so deep it had weight. Alara opened her eyes. 300 wolves were staring at her. Mira's wineglass had fallen from her hand and shattered on the stone floor. No one had noticed. Alpha Blackthorn's mouth hung open. The court priestess had sunk to her knees, both hands pressed over her heart, her lips moving in silent prayer. And on the high dais, Alpha King Ronan Valter slowly rose from his throne. His chair scraped back across the stone. He descended the 3 steps of the dais without taking his eyes off her. The motion of an Alpha King leaving his seat of honor in another pack's hall was so unprecedented that gasps rippled across the room. Cassian half rose to stop him, then froze, realizing he could not. Ronan crossed the hall in long, measured strides. Wolves parted before him like wheat before a scythe. Alara felt his aura close around her as he approached, not oppressive now, but charged, crackling, alive. The scent of him hit her for the first time, cedar and cold stone and something wild beneath it, something like the air after lightning, and her knees almost buckled. He stopped 3 paces away. For a long moment he simply looked at her. His face was still stone, but his eyes were the eyes of a drowning man who had just been thrown a rope. "Your name," he said. His voice was low, rough, as if he did not trust it. "Elara," she whispered. "Elara Vance, Your Majesty." Ronan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he turned slowly, deliberately toward the high table where Alpha Blackthorn sat frozen. Alpha Blackthorn. Ronan's voice was quiet. It carried to every corner of the hall. "Explain to me, why is my mate wearing the dress of a scullery maid?" The hall erupted. "Mate." The word slammed through the room like a physical blow. Elara stumbled back a half step, her hand flying to her throat. Mira made a small, strangled noise. Alpha Blackthorn's face had gone the color of old ash. "Your Majesty," Blackthorn stammered, shoving back from his table. "Surely there has been some confusion. The girl, she is a rejected Omega. Her mate cast her aside years ago. She cannot possibly— She is mine." Ronan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The aura rolling off him had deepened from pressure to presence, a tangible thing that made the chandeliers sway on their chains. "I have known it from the moment." She opened her mouth. "My wolf has known it from the moment I stepped into this hall and caught her scent beneath your filthy cooking grease." His iron eyes swept the dais. Every alpha in this room felt the air change when she began to sing. You simply lacked the courage to name what you were feeling. No one contradicted him. Because it was true. Every wolf in the room had felt something during that song. Something ancient and enormous turning its face toward the hall. They had assumed it was the magic of the hymn. They had not dared imagine it was the magic of a bond completing itself. But Mira had found her voice, shrill and cracking. But she was rejected. A true mate rejection is irreversible. Every wolf knows that. She cannot have a second, can't she? Ronan's gaze slid to Mira, and Mira flinched as if struck. "Tell me, Lady Mira, who rejected her?" Mira's mouth opened, closed. "His name," Ronan said softly, "was Garrick, I believe. Garrick of the Ironfang bloodline, a young warrior of your father's pack. 16 years old when he stood in your training yard and declared before the pack that he would not take the Vance girl as his mate because her scent was too weak and her wolf too small." He tilted his head. "Have I remembered correctly?" Alpha Blackthorn had gone very still. "How do you— I have been looking for her for 3 years, Ronan said. The hall went silent again. 3 years ago, he continued, his eyes returning to Elara. On a summer night, I woke from sleep with a pain in my chest, so sharp I thought I had been stabbed. I stumbled out of my tent and fell to my knees in the grass. I thought I was dying. His voice had gone quiet, but every word carried. I was on campaign at the northern border, 300 miles from here. I did not know then what had happened. I only knew that something I had been waiting for my entire life had just been torn, and I did not know where, and I did not know who, and I could not find her. Elara's hands had flown to her mouth. I sent spies to every pack in 3 kingdoms, Ronan said. I followed every rumor of a rejected Omega with a voice that made men weep. I was told the girl I was looking for did not exist. I was told I was chasing a ghost. He stepped closer to her. 1 step, 2. And all this time, she was scrubbing floors in the hall of a pack that owes me fealty. His hand lifted, slowly, and hovered just beneath her chin, not touching, only offering. Look at me, Elara. She lifted her eyes to his, and felt something inside her chest, something that had been a cold, broken thing for 3 years crack wide open and flood with light. It was not like the bond she had once shared with Garrick. That had been a thin, anxious thread, a teenager's flimsy notion of connection. This was a river. This was the sudden, shocking knowledge that somewhere in the world there was another heart that had been beating in time with hers since before she was born, and it was standing in front of her now, and it was his. Her wolf, which she had thought silenced forever, rose inside her with a soft, amazed whimper. "There you are," her wolf said. "I was so afraid you'd gone." "Oh," Alara whispered. Tears spilled over her cheeks. "Oh no." "No?" Ronan's voice cracked. I'm covered in kitchen soot," she said, and a hysterical little laugh escaped her. "I'm standing in front of the Alpha King, and I smell like onions, and I can't." He laughed. It was an astonished, broken sound, as if he had not laughed properly in years. Then, before the court, before 300 staring nobles, before Alpha Blackthorn and his cruel daughter and every wolf who had ever mocked her, Alpha King Ronan Valtaire dropped to one knee on the flagstones, took Alara Vance's small, chapped hand in both of his, and pressed his forehead against her knuckles. "My queen," he said hoarsely, "I would not care if you smelled of the deepest pit of the earth. I have been looking for you for half my life. Please, please, tell me I am not too late." The hall, which had spent the past hour laughing at her, was now utterly, terribly silent. Alara looked down at the bowed head of the most powerful wolf in the Northern Territories and felt her mother's voice whisper from somewhere far away. "The moon listens to the heart. Little wolf, not the throat. You're not too late," she whispered, and she let her fingers, finally, thread into his dark hair. They did not stay in Blackthorn Hall. Ronan would not allow it. Within an hour, Alara had been wrapped in his own black traveling cloak far too large, trailing on the ground behind her, and lifted onto his horse. Cassian rode beside them with a hand near his sword and a face like a thundercloud, still unable to quite believe what had happened. 30 of Ronan's royal guard flanked them as they rode out of the Blackthorn gates under a waning moon. Alpha Blackthorn had tried to protest, feebly. Something about diplomatic procedure and proper mate ceremonies. Ronan had simply looked at him. Blackthorn had stopped talking. They rode through the night. Alara, exhausted beyond words, fell asleep against Ronan's chest within the first hour, her cheek pressed to the warm leather of his jerkin. He held her with one arm braced around her waist, iron steady, as if afraid she might vanish if he loosened his grip even slightly. Every so often, Cassian caught him looking down at her sleeping face, with an expression of such naked wonder that Cassian had to look away, embarrassed to have witnessed it. They reached the Valtaire Summer Lodge at dawn. It was not a palace. Ronan had chosen the nearest of his residences deliberately, a stone hunting lodge nestled in a valley of pine and silver birch, 3 days' ride from the Blackthorn lands. Small, quiet, staffed only by a handful of servants who had served the Valtaire family for generations and knew how to be invisible. He had wanted, he told Cassian in a low voice as Alara slept, somewhere she could breathe. He carried her inside himself. Alara woke hours later in a bed softer than anything she had touched in 3 years. Sunlight poured through a window of leaded glass. A fire crackled in a stone hearth. The sheet smelled of lavender and cedar, she realized with a jolt, because he had slept there. This was his bed. He had given her his bed. She sat up slowly, clutching the blanket to her chest, and took in the room. And then she saw the woman sitting in the chair by the window. "Oh," Alara gasped. "Easy, little one." The woman rose tall, silver-haired, dressed in the deep green robes of a pack healer. Her smile was gentle, and her eyes were the color of a river at dusk. "I'm Merrin. I served the old king, Ronan's father, as head healer for 40 years. I've been asked to look after you." She crossed to the bed and placed a tray on the side table. Warm bread, honey, soft cheese, a pot of tea that smelled of mint. "The king is downstairs pacing a hole in his own floor. He has been ordered, mind you, by me not to come up until you've eaten and bathed and rested, whichever you prefer first. He is not handling it well." Alara gave a small, watery laugh. "He can come up. I don't mind." "He minds," Merrin said firmly. "He says you deserve a morning that belongs only to you, without any man in it demanding your attention, including him." Her eyes softened. "He is a good man, child. A hard one sometimes, but a good one. And he has been carrying a wound in his chest for 3 years, and you are the one who can heal it." Alara's eyes filled with tears again. She was getting very tired of crying. "Eat," Merrin said kindly. "Then we'll see about a bath." By the time Ronan was finally allowed into the room nearly noon, after Alara had eaten, bathed in a copper tub in front of the fire, and been dressed by Marin in a simple gown of soft blue wool, he looked like a man who had not slept in a week. He stopped just inside the door. Alara was sitting in the window seat, her damp hair loose over her shoulders, the winter sunlight catching in it and turning it to molten amber. She had been staring out at the pines, and she turned when she heard him enter. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I am trying very hard," Ronan said finally, his voice rough. "Not to frighten you. You're not frightening me. I want to cross this room," he said, "and never let go of you again. It is taking all of my discipline to stand here." Alara's heart gave a slow, terrible lurch. She rose from the window seat, then crossed the room. He crossed it. He did not kiss her, not yet. He simply gathered her against his chest, one large hand cradling the back of her head, the other splayed across her back, and held her as if she were something infinitely precious and infinitely fragile. Alara closed her eyes and pressed her face into the hollow of his throat, and breathed in cedar and cold stone and lightning, and for the first time in her entire life, she understood what her mother had meant when she had said that the moon blesses some women with home. "I have so much to tell you," Ronan murmured into her hair. "Tell me." So he did. He told her about the night he had collapsed in his tent, how he had known, with the terrible instinct of a wolf whose bond has been ruptured, that somewhere in the world his true mate had been rejected by a fool who did not recognize her, how he had spent every resource of his crown trying to find her. He told her about the spies, the dead-end leads, the priestesses he had consulted, the old shamans in the mountains who had told him his mate was alive but hidden not by magic, they said, but by something stranger, by her own despair. A wolf who believed herself unlovable became difficult to scent, they had warned him. The bond would dim, the trail would grow cold. He told her about his mother, the old Luna, dead 10 years now, who had taught him the Luna hymn when he was a boy, and told him that one day he would hear a woman sing it and know that the moon had answered him. "I had almost stopped believing her," Ronan said. They were sitting now, side by side on the window seat, his hand wrapped around hers. "I had begun to think I would have to take a political mate. The council was pressing me. I had agreed to attend Blackthorn's feast because there were 3 eligible daughters from allied packs who would be presented to me. I was going to choose one. I had decided it on the ride down." Alara's breath caught. "And then," he said, his thumb tracing slow circles over her knuckles, "a girl in a servant's dress walked into the middle of the hall and opened her mouth, and the world ended." "Ronan, I have not told you the worst of it yet." Her eyes flew to his face. "The boy who rejected you," he said quietly. "Garrick of Ironfang. What about him?" Ronan's jaw tightened. "He did not reject you because your wolf was weak, Alara." She frowned. "Of course he did. Everyone saw. Everyone saw what they were told to see. I had Cassian send riders to Ironfang this morning. Garrick is 22 years old now, and he is a drunk, and he talks too much in taverns, and he has been telling a very interesting story for the past 3 years." Alara went cold. "What story?" "He was paid," Ronan said. "Paid to reject you. Paid by a wolf from the Blackthorn pack who brought him a purse of gold, and a warning that if he tried to claim you, his entire family would be quietly killed on the border. Paid." Alara's voice cracked. Who would pay to see me rejected?" Ronan's iron eyes held hers steadily. "Mira Blackthorn." Alara could not breathe. "No," she whispered. "No, that doesn't make sense. Mira and I were children together. She was my cousin's friend. She didn't even know me that well. She knew you well enough." Ronan's voice was very soft, the way a wolf grows soft when it is holding its rage tightly on a leash. "She knew your mother was from an old bloodline, a bloodline the Blackthorn elders had long suspected carried what they call the moon's voice, the gift of singers whose mates are destined to be kings. Alara, your grandmother sang at the coronation of my grandfather. Did you know that?" Alara shook her head numbly. She had not known. Her mother had never spoken of it. Her mother had died too soon. "The Blackthorn line has wanted a queen in my court for 3 generations, Ronan continued. "Mira's mother tried to arrange a betrothal between Mira and me when we were both 14. I refused. My mother refused. The matter was closed." His hand tightened around hers. But Mira grew up believing she was meant to be my Luna. And then, when she was 16, she attended a gathering where your mother sang a lullaby to a sick child, and an old priestess in the corner of the room wept and said, "That voice is in the blood. Her daughter will be the next Luna Queen." Ilara's hand had begun to shake. "Mira heard her," Ronan said, "and Mira went home and began to plan." Ilara swallowed. "She arranged my parents' death, didn't she?" It was not a question. Ronan did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice was gentle. "The border raid that killed them was not random. Cassian is still investigating. But yes, we believe so." Ilara made a small sound. It was not quite a sob. It was the sound of a door she had kept locked for 3 years finally blowing open. "She took everything from me," she whispered. "My parents, my home, my rank, my mate, my voice. I stopped singing. Ronan, I stopped singing for 3 years because every time I tried my throat closed up. I know. I spent 3 years thinking I was broken." Her voice was rising now, raw, furious. "I spent 3 years apologizing for existing. I let them call me a rejected Omega. I scrubbed her floors. I served her wine. Ilara, I sang for her tonight, because I thought it was the only way to keep from being whipped. Ilara, look at me." She looked at him. Her eyes were blazing now, not with tears but with something else, something new, something hot and alive, that her wolf was stretching inside her to meet. "Good," Ronan said quietly. "There she is. There is my queen." She froze. "The wolf you thought was broken," he said, "has been sleeping, because she was grieving, because she was protecting you, because she knew that if she showed herself in the middle of Blackthorn's hall before I arrived, Mira would have found a way to kill her too. But she is not broken, Ilara. She never was. And now that I am here, now that she knows she is safe, she is going to wake up." His iron eyes gleamed. "And when she does, the entire Northern Territory is going to feel it." Ilara stared at him. Then, slowly, she began to smile. It was not a soft smile. It was her mother's smile, the one her mother had worn the night she had taught Ilara the Luna hymn by the old stone well, the one that had always looked a little like a wolf baring its teeth under the moon. "Tell me what you're planning," she said. "Mira Blackthorn will face the Crown's justice," Ronan said. "For conspiracy, for murder, for the attempted theft of a royal mate. Her father will lose his alpha seat for failing to see what happened in his own pack. I had considered handling it quietly. And now?" "And now," Ronan said, "I think my queen deserves to pass the sentence herself." Ilara's smile widened. "When?" "The Crown Court convenes in 3 weeks. Traditionally, a new Luna is presented to the realm at the first full moon after her claiming. Your presentation is already being prepared." He lifted her hand to his lips. "Would you like to make your debut by delivering the verdict that ends the Blackthorn line's century of ambition?" "Yes," Ilara whispered. "Then it will be so." He kissed her hand. And then, finally, he kissed her mouth. It was a careful kiss, a patient kiss, the kiss of a man who had waited half his life for it and intended to remember every second. Ilara curled her hands into the front of his shirt and kissed him back, and somewhere deep in her chest her long, silent wolf threw back her head and howled with joy. The 3 weeks before the Crown Court became the strangest and most beautiful of Ilara's life. Marin, the healer, took over her care with the fierce tenderness of a woman who had never had daughters. She fed Ilara rich food cream and honey and red meat and bone broth until the hollow places in her cheeks began to fill in. She wrapped her hands in warm oiled cloths every evening until the calluses from 3 years of scrubbing pots began to soften. She brushed her hair 100 strokes every night and told her stories about Ronan as a small boy. Stories that made Ilara laugh until she had to press her hand over her mouth. Ronan himself was a constant, steadying presence. He did not rush her. He did not press for more than she offered. Every morning he took her walking in the pine woods around the lodge, her small hand tucked into the crook of his arm, and told her about the Northern Territories, the cities she would rule beside him, the people who would become her people, the wolves who had already begun to send gifts to the lodge. When word of her existence spread, carved pendants, bundles of dried herbs, A letter from an old woman in a border village who had written, simply, "I heard there is a queen now. I have waited a long time." And at night, Ronan slept in the adjoining room and did not touch her, though Alara could feel the effort of his restraint in the way he held himself when he wished her good night. He had made her a promise, he told her, the second evening. He would not lay a claim on her body until she was ready, not until the bond felt chosen, not merely recognized. Until then, he would wait. Alara had cried again that night, quietly, into the lavender-scented pillow, because no one in her entire life had ever offered her the gift of being waited for. Her voice came back slowly. The first morning, she hummed a few notes by the fire and flinched at the sound of her own throat. The second morning, she sang 3 lines of a lullaby and stopped, trembling. By the end of the first week, she could sing entire folk songs to Marin in the kitchen, and Marin would listen with her eyes closed and shake her head and mutter, "Moon, save us, child. What a thing to almost have been lost." And her wolf came back more slowly still, but she came. On the 10th night, Ilara woke in the dark, with her heart pounding, and felt her, not as a voice, not as a whisper, but as a presence, warm and enormous and ancient, curled inside her chest like a great, sleeping creature finally stretching after a long winter. Ilara lay very still in the dark, and felt her wolf breathing, and tears slid sideways down her temples into her hair. "I'm sorry," Ilara whispered silently. "I'm sorry I thought you were gone. I'm sorry I gave up on you." "I never gave up on you," her wolf answered. And Ilara fell asleep, smiling. On the 15th day, Ronan took her to a moonlit clearing deep in the pine forest and taught her how to shift. Her wolf was not small. This was the first shock. She had spent 3 years being told her wolf was runt-sized, thin-blooded, an embarrassment, and then she dropped to her hands and knees in the silver grass of the clearing, and her bones flowed like water, and she rose up on 4 paws and shook herself, and she was enormous. Not as large as Ronan's great black wolf, who stood watching her with eyes like golden coins and a stance of pure reverence, but large, sleek, powerful. Her fur was the color of dark honey shot through with silver, and her eyes were the color of a river at dusk, and when she threw back her head and howled, every wolf within 20 miles of the lodge heard her and went still. Ronan padded to her side and pressed his great head against her shoulder. "Hello, my queen," his wolf said. "Hello, my king," hers answered. They ran together beneath the moon, until dawn began to silver the horizon, and Ilara understood, finally, what she had been born for. The Crown Court of the Northern Territories convened on the night of the first full moon of winter. It was held in a great amphitheater of white stone, open to the sky, carved into the side of a mountain, and surrounded by the lights of the royal city. Thousands of wolves filled the tiered seats, nobles in furs and silks, warriors in ceremonial armor, elders wrapped in the deep colors of their packs. Above them, the full moon rose enormous and white over the eastern peaks, bathing the amphitheater in silver light. In the center of the amphitheater, on her knees on the cold stone, Mira Blackthorn awaited judgment. She had not been treated cruelly. She had been given 3 weeks in a comfortable cell, good food, clean clothes. Ronan had refused, on Alara's instruction, to let her be mistreated before her trial. "Let her stand before us with no excuses," Alara had said. "Let everyone see clearly." Mira's father knelt beside her. Alpha Blackthorn had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. His hands shook. He did not look up. The great doors at the top of the amphitheater opened. Ronan entered first. He wore black, as he always did, but tonight his cloak was lined with silver wolf fur, and a true crown sat on his dark hair, a thin circle of pale gold, simple, ancient. The assembled wolves rose as one, and dropped their eyes in the ritual bow of the territory. Then Alara stepped through the doors behind him, and a sound went through the crowd that was not quite a gasp and not quite a sigh. She wore silver. Her gown was the color of moonlight on water, the bodice embroidered with the crescent sigil of the Voltaire line. Her dark honey hair had been braided with tiny pearls and left to fall down her back. A cloak of the same silver wolf fur as Ronan's fell from her shoulders. She wore no crown yet that would come later, at her formal coronation, but she did not need one. She walked beside her king with her chin lifted and her eyes clear, and her wolf walked with her beneath her skin, and the thousands of wolves in the amphitheater felt the moon's voice in her presence like a held note in the air. She had been a scullery maid 3 weeks ago. No one, looking at her now, would have believed it. They descended the long staircase together. When they reached the floor of the amphitheater, Ronan took his seat on the carved stone throne. A second, smaller throne had been set beside his. He gestured to it. Ilara sat. The court priest read the charges aloud in a voice that carried to the highest tiers. Conspiracy. Murdered 2 counts for Ilara's parents. Attempted murder of a destined royal mate through the slow starvation of rejection and servitude. Bribery of a young warrior to commit a sacred betrayal. Knowledge of a moon-chosen Luna, and active suppression of her bond. The list went on. When the priest finished, silence fell. Ronan turned his head slightly toward Ilara. My queen, the charges are proven. The sentence is yours. Ilara rose from her throne. She walked slowly down the shallow steps to the floor of the amphitheater, until she stood perhaps 10 paces from Mira. Mira was staring at the stone between her knees. Her perfect golden hair had come loose from its braid. She was shaking. Look at me, Mira, Ilara said. Her voice was quiet. It carried to every corner of the amphitheater. Mira looked up. Her face was wet with tears. Whether they were tears of fear or tears of shame, Ilara could not tell. It did not, she realized, matter. I stood in your father's banquet hall 3 weeks ago, Ilara said, and I thought I was nothing. I thought I was a broken thing that deserved to be mocked. I thought the moon had forgotten me. She tilted her head slightly. You made me think that, Mira. You worked very hard to make me think that. For 9 years, for my entire adolescence and most of my young adulthood, you curated my despair the way a gardener curates roses. Mira's mouth opened. No sound came out. I am not going to have you killed, Ilara said. A ripple of surprise went through the assembled court. I thought about it, Ilara continued. I thought about it for many nights. My king offered me your life. He would have given it to me with no questions asked. Her river dusk eyes held Mira's. But I am not going to become the thing you made me fear I was. I am not going to begin my reign as Luna Queen of the Northern Territories by spilling the blood of a woman on her knees. Somewhere in the high tiers, an old woman began to weep. Instead, Ilara said, You are going to live. You are going to live a very long time. You are going to be stripped of your rank, your name, and your wolf bond to the Blackthorn Pack. You will be sent to the northernmost outpost of the crown, where the winters are dark for 6 months of the year, and you will serve the Luna Temple there as a scrubwoman. Mira made a small, broken sound. You will wear gray wool, Ilara said. You will sleep in the servants' quarters. You will scrub the floors of the temple where the priestesses sing the Luna hymn at every full moon. You will hear them sing it, Mira, every month, for the rest of your life. And every time you hear it, you will remember the night you tried to use it to destroy me, and you will understand that the moon saw you, and the moon judged you, and the moon found that the only punishment worthy of you was to make you listen to her song until the end of your days. The silence in the amphitheater was absolute. Mira was sobbing now, openly, her forehead pressed to the cold stone. Your father, Ilara continued, turning to Alpha Blackthorn, will surrender his alpha seat to his younger brother, who I am told is a decent man. Blackthorn will remain, but not under your line. You, Alpha Blackthorn, will retire to a mountain monastery and spend the remainder of your years in contemplation of what you allowed to happen under your own roof. Alpha Blackthorn bowed his head. Yes, my queen. Ilara turned back to her throne. She climbed the steps with slow, unhurried grace and sat down beside her king. It is done, she said. Ronan reached across and took her hand and raised it to his lips and pressed a kiss against her knuckles that was a promise and a prayer all at once. The amphitheater erupted into a thunder of stamping feet and howling wolves, the ancient salute of the Northern Territories, to a new Luna who had proven herself worthy of her crown. It went on for a very long time. Ilara closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, and somewhere inside her chest, her wolf rose up on silent paws and bowed her great honey-silver head to the moon. Winter came early that year. The royal city was buried under 3 feet of snow by the time of Alara's formal coronation, and the ceremony had to be moved into the great hall of the Valtaire Palace. She was crowned on a quiet afternoon, with snow falling beyond the tall windows and only the nearest members of the court in attendance. Ronan had insisted. "You have had enough spectacle for one lifetime," he had said. "Let this one be yours." They were mated on the night of the winter solstice properly, in the ancient way, beneath the light of the longest moon of the year. When Ronan's teeth closed gently on the curve where her neck met her shoulder, and the mate bond sealed between them in a blinding rush of silver and gold, Alara understood at last what her mother had been trying to tell her all those years ago. The moon listens to the heart. Her heart was no longer alone. The lodge became their favorite retreat. They returned there often in the first year of her reign, stealing away for 3 or 4 days at a time whenever court duties allowed. The little stone hunting lodge in the Pine Valley, with its leaded glass windows and its fireplaces, and its kind old healer, who had become something very like a grandmother to Alara, was where they were happiest. It was there, on a quiet spring evening almost exactly a year after the night of Blackthorn's banquet, that Alara sat on the window seat where Ronan had first crossed the room to hold her. The window was open. The scent of pine and melting snow drifted in on the evening air. The first stars were appearing. She was humming. It was the Luna hymn, not the grand, heartbreaking version she had sung in Blackthorn's hall. A softer version, the way her mother had taught it to her by the old stone well when she was 7 years old. A version meant for one listener only. Her hand rested on the very slight curve of her belly, where Marin had confirmed just that morning, with tears in her eyes, a new, small life had begun to grow. A daughter, the old healer had said with the quiet certainty of a woman who had delivered 4 decades of royal babies. A daughter, with a voice. Ronan came up behind her silently and slid his arms around her from behind, resting his chin against the top of her head. He listened to her humming without interrupting. His hand found hers on the curve of her belly and pressed there, gentle and wondering. "She likes it when you sing," he murmured. "I know," Alara whispered. Outside the window, the first bright star of the evening hung above the dark line of the pines. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf was howling softly, contentedly, the kind of howl that was not a call for help or a cry for a mate, but simply a wolf telling the moon that she was home. Alara closed her eyes and leaned back against her king's chest, and let her song rise out into the gathering dusk, and felt the small, sleeping life beneath her hand, and understood finally that some girls who were thrown away were only being saved for the hands that knew how to hold them. The moon rose. The song went on. And the night was very kind. If this story moved you even a little, let me know down in the comments. I'd love to hear which moment hit hardest. Was it Alara singing in the banquet hall with soot still on her hands? Ronan dropping to one knee in front of his entire court? Or the quiet moment at the window at the very end, when she finally understood she was home? Drop a comment telling me what you think Alara's daughter should be named. I read every single one, and the best suggestions might just show up in a future story. If you love alpha romance, rejected mate tales, and stories where the underestimated girl rises into her power, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a new upload. Until next time, may your moon be kind and your voice be heard.